Good morning. It's another Friday, and that means another edition of our podcast, John and Jeremy, Zogby, father and son, often different points of view. A reminder, it is real and unscripted, always civil, always respectful, and we're having a lot of fun. I hope you are as well. Please don't hesitate to write into us, to comment, to let us know, and to let others know what you think of the podcast. Good morning, Jer. How are you?
Hey, good morning. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks. Shall we jump right in as we always do?
I'm waiting for it.
Okay, good. So here we go. Longtime journalist friend in D.C. I don't think he'll mind if I mention his name, Paul Bedard, formerly of U.S. News and World Report and now at the Washington Examiner, writes the famous Washington Secrets going back decades. He wrote to me with a very simple question. He posed it as this: Jimmy Biden, with a question mark. And basically what he meant by that is Joe Biden, the 21st century version of Jimmy Carter, widely regarded up to now as a failed presidency. And I responded very simply. My brief comments were, number one, I'm not so sure that Jimmy Carter, as he has been portrayed, was the actual Jimmy Carter of the 70s. Two new biographies, Jonathan Alter is one, Kai Bird is another, appear to portray Jimmy Carter as far more successful in his presidency and not given enough credit for a number of things, not the least of which internationally was he kept us out of war with Iran, and ultimately the hostages were freed under negotiation under his presidency. It was the optics arranged by Iraq and the new coming Reagan administration that freed the hostages just as Ronald Reagan was being inaugurated. But at the same time, he negotiated the first and lasting peace between an Arab country, Egypt, and Israel. Other things mentioned as well. But that leads to the question of where we are right now. Is the Biden presidency spinning out of control? Is Afghanistan the last straw? And from here, it's just a falling apart of the Biden administration. A, he can't recover, and B, it'll be a disaster for Democrats in the midterms. I'm going to give you my answer first, and then certainly want to hear your point of view. Very simple answer is no. The Biden administration is not finished. This has been terrible to watch. The events of Thursday, the bombing, both at the hotel and more importantly at the airport, the deaths, the takeover of the Taliban, and now the spinning out of control with ISIS-K, the Afghanistan version of ISIS, meaning a protracted civil war now between the Taliban and its enemies for control of Afghanistan. But will Joe Biden be given credit in the long run for steadfastness, for getting out of a war that the United States just simply couldn't sustain? Secondly, will his domestic agenda ultimately triumph? I suspect that it will, but I'm a pollster. And very briefly, even at this low point, and it is a low point, he is averaging 47% approval, 49% disapproval. That's not good. At his high, he was at 54, even 55%, and 39 to 43% disapproval. Numbers have moved a few points, lost some support, certainly among independents, but his Democratic base appears to be intact, and I think that he will ride this out. Good thing for him that he's getting this Afghanistan blunder out of the way early. There's still another year before we start focusing on the 2022 elections. What do you think?
Boy, it is tough to be a political analyst. It is tough to be a Biden fan right now. I think they call him the commander in chief, and that implies the commander in chief of the military, of the armed services. But to me, it's been obvious that Joe Biden, and of course, our listeners know ideologies and party completely aside, because I just don't align myself with either one of the parties. Joe Biden is the commander in chief of division and chaos. There has been nothing short of chaos and divisiveness. Now, I understand you could say, well, that's at the ground level, and he's the leadership. But his language, whether it's abroad for foreign policy or whether it's for domestic policy, is inflammatory. I see no attempt to unite. And remember, following that tumultuous period between the election and to inauguration day, in which our and I'm going to use this word purposefully, our republic, not our democracy, because we tend to forget we're not a democracy, we're a republic, which is a form of democracy. Our republic was teetering on the brink. There was the potential loss of a lot of confidence. There was a loss of confidence, and no sooner he got in, and inflammatory language, the ever expanding web of enemies of the state, which was basically directed at the other half of the country, whether it's non-white versus white, whether it's Republican versus Democrat, whether it's man versus woman, and now, of course, vaxxer versus anti-vaxxer. He is clearly the commander-in-chief of division and chaos. And then the most recent episode of chaos was the pullout of Kabul, of Afghanistan. I have always believed that we should have never been there, and every year wanted us out. And I agree that we should get out, but for the life of me, it makes no sense in the manner in which it has done it. It's completely backwards. You get the personnel and the civilians out first, you get the weaponry out, and then you get the military. This is chaos. A lot of people have a suspicion that this is managed chaos. It's very difficult to figure out where this is going, but I just cannot believe the notion that this is sheer stupidity. This looks to stink to high heaven. I've suggested in the recent podcast that this could be a pivot. Of course, the Pentagon and the military, the Department of Defense, have stated that they want to shift their focus away from insurgency, which is was the war on terror that we've had for the last 20 years. It's basically been the never-ending war on terror. Those of us who were critical of it knew that it was perpetual war for perpetual war for perpetual peace, which is just the essence of empire building. But the shift has been stated as away from insurgency and more focus on peer-to-peer, which in military language translates to Russia and China. But what's going on? What's going on within the Pentagon is there? It seems to be that there is a battle between where are we going to shift our energy and our resources. Are we going to go back into Afghanistan? It kind of looks like that. Remember, over the last 17 years, there has been no shortage of promises to pull out, and whatever the president was, whether it was Bush, Obama, or Trump, they would pull out 2,000 or 3,000 troops, both in Iraq and Afghanistan. There would be a terrorist attack, and we're sending them back in. We're sending in more. Is this just an interlude to get back into Afghanistan? Is this the buildup to a proxy war, but we don't know the answer. We'll find out shortly, but no question about it. This leadership is falling far short of anything that should be leadership.
Okay, wow. So you give the president very low grades then, just to boil it down to its simplest terms.
Yeah. I mean, I think beyond grades, we're looking at expelling, right?
So let's parse this if we can and understand together the complications that are involved here. So first of all, you mentioned whether we should have been there in the first place or stayed there in the first place. It seems as if one of the things that we should have learned from Vietnam in particular, and then Iraq as well, that happened pretty much simultaneously, is we ultimately have to ask ourselves the questions not whether or not we have military capacity to blow up the enemy into pieces, but does our involvement matter? Can we bring in or restore good? Does our presence in there ultimately be a positive thing or a negative thing? Are U.S. interests really involved or peripherally involved? Is there someone to take over power so that if we do go in and we enable a quote victory by our allies, are they prepared to take power? Those are all very, very complicated questions, and more, as many of you probably understand, if you just look at those questions alone, the answers to most of them are no. That should we get involved? Are our interests involved? If we do get involved, can we make it better? Seems as if the answers to those were a resounding no. On the other hand, we were there, and we kept kicking the can down the road, fully understanding, I don't think the point is ever lost, that the Taliban eventually would return. Why is that? The country is in chaos. It's not really a country. It's multiple tribes vying for control of their region and control of all of that real estate and the rich resources. We're going to stop hundreds, even thousands of years of warring tribes? And the answer to that was no. You get to the third level, this is kind of like the Vietnam syndrome. What do you tell the parents and the families of those servicemen and women who've already lost their lives? That your son, daughter, husband, brother died in vain? That kind of motivates things. This is to stay. This is the anatomy of a mess. I'm going to give Biden credit for being resolute and saying we're getting out. He was never a fan of a protracted war in Afghanistan, never at all. In fact, he walked out on a dinner with the then President Hamid Karzai because Karzai was laughing at him, saying, look, this is your war, it's not ours. So Biden tried to extricate himself. I do have to give him and his administration very low marks for the evacuation. That should have been happening, and visas should have been processing for months now. The inevitability of the Taliban takeover, whether it was 2 months, 2 weeks, or 2 hours, was just always present, no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, what do we say to the parents?
Yeah.
That's a tough one, of course. But then you have to say, well, what do we say to the future parents? What do we say to those parents who lost their children? More children are going to have to perish for nothing. That's the answer. You said about our track record. I mean, let's go back to, okay, with an exception of the Gulf War, because that was in a largely international war. I mean, there was a coalition of what, 15, 20 nations? Is that about right? A couple dozen?
That's all.
So I mean, and there was more morale around the world for that. But I mean, we've got on our track record here Korea, a total disaster. People don't even realize the magnitude of the disaster of Korea. Most people don't realize that there was genocide in Korea. We're talking about over 1 million people gone. Of course, we have Vietnam. We have the Iraq Part Two and Afghanistan. We have Libya. We have Yemen. We have Ukraine. Ukraine was more a proxy war. We have all of this devastation, and you alluded to this. It's not that we can't win the war, because we obviously could, right? I mean, the United States defeated, well, of course, along with the Russians. Never forget about their contribution to fighting back the Nazis. But the United States, along with Russia, defeated fascism, the Nazis and the Japanese and the Italians. So there's obviously the military might to win these wars. I'm starting to question whether the objective is to win the war, other than to position geostrategically to build up the bases. I mean, you just look at a map of military bases, and it's unbelievable. There's a meme. I actually have it on my desktop, and it's a map of the world, and it has all these dots that represent military bases surrounding Russia, like very aggressively. And the meme says, basically to the effect, Russia wants war with the United States. Look at how they position their country around our military bases. I mean, it's totally ironic. It's totally a joke. That is the nature of NATO. And, I'm sorry, I'm reminded of this story. It just popped into my head, because this really goes back to Obama. Obama certainly had my heartstrings and my focus and my support, because he was promising an end. He was promising a new way. And when I was a teacher in my high school, an inner city school, there was a very troubled youth in my class, and this kid was, let's just say he was a dangerous kid. I had to remove him from the class one time, and I couldn't even turn my back on him. And he was wearing a shirt of Barack Obama, and I ultimately asked him. I think it was in another situation. I had asked him, "Oh yeah, so you're a fan of Barack Obama?" And he said, "Yeah, I used to be." 14-year-old, and I said, "Well, what do you mean you used to be?" He said, "Well, I liked him because he promised an end to all these wars." And I said, "Well, what happened?" He said, "We're still in all these wars." I mean, a 14-year-old realized that. And so this is where we're at. And Biden has continued that. This strategy is never-ending wars. And so it goes back to your question, what do we say to those parents? You lost your parents, and other parents have to continue to lose for nothing? Or do we learn from your pain that we shouldn't be doing this anymore? We made a major mistake. We're sorry. Now what we want to promise you is future parents don't have to go through what you're going through.
So there's a whole other element, is I'm sure you know, and that is that there are tens, hundreds of billions of dollars in federal contracts for infrastructure, for school building, for medical building and equipment. What happens to all those contracts, all those contractors, without U.S. protection? In fact, without their presence, do they lose all of that equipment and all of that money to the Taliban? And as we see, even this morning, the Taliban shortly will be at war with ISIS-K, which is the Afghan arm or wing, or whatever you want to call it, of ISIS. So this war in Afghanistan is not over, and it's not over for us either, which is very tragic. I think Joe Biden was dealt a bad hand of cards. I will certainly admit that the evacuation was about as poorly done as an operation could possibly be as done. But I think that he has the capacity to recoup. And I guess time will tell. That's my final word. How about you?
Yeah. Well, every administration has that wonderful excuse to say, well, look what I inherited. Yet they continue to make it worse. And we know that whoever the next administration is, especially if it's for team bad, right? Because I mean, this is the psychology that we're in. Hey, I'm with team good. You're with team bad. Well, team bad gets into the presidency. Well, it was them. I inherited the mess from them. And even if it's the same party, they could always lay the blame. I guess they could skip Biden. They could say, well, this really all goes back to Trump. But that's a bunch of nonsense. That's like akin to the playground in middle school or grade school. But the other thing is, I used to be a big fan of Noam Chomsky, and I kind of stopped appreciating him. But there's one thing he taught to me through his books, and he has a wonderful quote. He says, "Everybody wants to know, how do we stop terrorism? And it's actually quite simple. Stop funding it and stop participating in it." So in other words, we'll never create a world in which there is pure peace, but we can ensure that there's a world with less chaos. That's the answer. You have to cut the cord.
Okay. Well, another good and healthy discussion. Again, to everybody, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And we're signing out. We'll see you next Friday. Have a good week.